Welcome back to episode 107 of the Block Runner Podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's up, Willis?
All right, today we got you a very special guest, Scott Gray, Head of Business Development of Dev Protocol. Appreciate you joining us, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Like, we had to find you because, I don't know, we're like hardcore into the crypto space like everybody, right?
Yeah.
And we're doing this new thing where we're like, it's an everyday challenge where, we're just every day we're covering something new. So, of course, we've been stumbling across a whole slew of projects. And as soon as we found out about Dev, I mean, a little background about us. We're developers ourselves. We're building a decentralized application within Decentraland. So we kind of know, like, intuitively, like, a lot of the problems when it comes to developing in this space. And then as soon as we stumbled upon Dev, it just adds on to, like, I don't know, like, our current beliefs of how things are supposed to work. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, missing components to the whole decentralized ecosystem. So we had to, like, get a hold of you or somebody in this team and, like, see if we could learn more about, whether or not our intuition is correct. So if you could, like, just open up, like, kind of explain the background of what Dev Protocol is and, like, how you got involved with it.
Yeah, definitely. So the core team is from Tokyo, Japan. So the project was started in 2018, but it was actually, I would say, a decade-long project. So our founder, Mayumi, she was in marketing in Japan, and she was helping creators, specifically artisans, helping working on restoration in ancient temples in Japan. And what she noticed is that these artisans basically spend their whole lives practicing the skill set and restoring, Japanese culture from centuries ago. Mm-hmm. And Japan makes a lot of money on tourism for these temples. And the artisans that, deliver 99% of the value here are capturing maybe less than 1% of the value that the tourism gets. So she kind of explored for a few years how to make that more sustainable and how to capture more value for those creators. And she met the CTO who was in blockchain at the time. And he just came, they meshed their ideas together, and they basically said, open source developers have the same issues, and they're just as much artists as the artisans, preserving these Japanese temples. So let's focus on open source on GitHub and NPM.js and all the other platforms. So that's how Dev Protocol came to be. And over the last year, we made the Stake Social, or DApp. And this is where creators can tokenize their GitHub projects in a few minutes, and where patrons can stake their dev and make a return for both themselves and for the OSS project.
So one of the questions that we had was tokenization on GitHub. Is it natively supported, or is it some like a plugin that you guys use in order to actually have some feedback from GitHub and then bring that feedback to the developer and see, how many stakers are getting, or how does the interface on GitHub change with Dev Protocol?
It doesn't change at all. It's not a native integration.
Okay.
So we actually built our own Oracle. It's called Chaos. And what that does is it allows us to confirm the ownership of the user trying to tokenize a project. So what happens is essentially you send us an application, we approve it because we want to make sure that it's a legitimate OSS project with an open source license. And then once we approve it, we send you a link to tokenize your project. So that's the first step. So you submit a name for your project, the token name, and then we mint 10 million tokens. And then once that's done, you actually need to authenticate your ownership of that token. So we ask you to submit your personal access token, so that only the admin of the GitHub project can do this. And then once you submit your personal access token, our Chaos Oracle actually confidentially authenticates that personal access token. Okay. And once that's confirmed on the Ethereum blockchain, then you're good to go on our network.
Interesting. So you mentioned, we noticed that one of the things that you guys accomplished was a grant through Microsoft. and it just so happens that Microsoft owns GitHub. Is there plans for any native integration onto GitHub?
Yeah, definitely. So we're part of Microsoft for Startups Japan, and they've been helping us, of course, with credits, but also with networking and with communications
Okay.
and marketing. So we have spoken to GitHub before. Currently, they don't do much support and partnerships with startups, but we're hoping with the upcoming releases that we have over the next year that we'll be able to capture their attention and definitely their interest, and we can explore more native integrations.
Oh, nice. Okay, that'll be huge. Just because I think the general developer that uses GitHub is not necessarily into cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
And
that's an interesting point to bring across. Like, whenever the founders were conceptualizing dev, was it really? Because the idea is to tokenize all of open source development. Not all of that is like in the crypto space, right? There's a lot of that happening in like traditional tech, right? Like,
yeah.
So it's not so much like I don't know, like kind of like where does the philosophy align with like the developers with your project as far as like is dev gearing towards like solving a lot of the like the allocation of responsibility for development in like a decentralized ecosystem? Is that what we're trying to tackle here with the dev protocol, or is it more just or more like
Funding,
introducing like solving the dilemma of like how to bring in more sustainability for development across all ecosystems, not necessarily just decentralized? You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. So right now we support both Web 2 and Web 3 open source projects. So we don't discriminate there.
Yeah.
We think that there's a future for both of them, of course, and we think that, providing sustainability for both Web 2 and Web 3 are definitely important. And we kind of see Dev Protocol as essentially like a giant incubator, right? So you create your creator token.
Okay.
And the reason for this creator token is so that the inflationary funding from yield farming goes to the holders of the creator token. So for example, if you created your own OSS project on Dev Protocol and you started making revenue, then whoever holds the OSS token would receive that funding. So if you share it with your project maintainers or team members or community members, they would start receiving that funding. But we also know that eventually a lot of open source projects might outgrow that funding, and you could then turn off the faucet for that inflationary funding, and you could create your own microeconomies with the OSS token. So that's really important because eventually we may see tokens that say, okay, let's shut off the inflationary funding from Dev Protocol so that we can distribute the creator token to everyone, or maybe we use it as a governance token, or we use it as a utility token. It's a Web3 OSS project. And at that point, then the token takes on more utility. And since Dev Protocol captures a 5% fee of every OSS token, we capture the upside value for our community that helped fund those tokens initially.
Yeah, so you mentioned that 10 million tokens of the OSS token. So an OSS token is essentially any project that gets onto Dev Protocol. Once they get onboarded, 10 million tokens gets issued to this project. And you're saying 5% goes to the treasury for devs, right?
Correct.
So the question is, does every project have to mint 10 million tokens, or is it up to the developer to say, well, I actually need 100 million?
Yeah, every project currently, it's standardized. So every project has to mint 10 million tokens.
Okay.
There was a few reasons behind this design choice. The first reason was we wanted, because most open source developers, they maintain multiple projects. So we wanted to just delete any information asymmetry, and we wanted to have them know how many tokens or how much percent of each project they own right off the bat. So 10 million is a nice round number that you can do the math on. The second is it's for long-term marketing. So in the future, when you see an OSS project with a token that has 10 million supply, then you'll know that they used their protocol to mint it. And the third one is we also want to eliminate any possible information asymmetry within the DAO. So since it takes 5% of each token, it might get confusing if it was 5% of different amounts.
Sure.
So just having 5% of like 10 million which is 500,000,
Mm-hmm.
is a lot easier for
Yeah.
the community to get behind.
100%. And like simplifying things for developers is always good.
Even for the retail investor, it's simpler.
Easier to understand because like
Mhm.
even when kickstarting like a whole new token economy, that's one of the big questions. Like trying to understand the tokenomics of like this arbitrary
Yeah.
minting count.
Yeah.
Like which one's superior? Nowadays we're seeing like trendy things in DeFi. Like the lower the better. Like
Yeah.
if I have 10,000
Yeah,
tokens
that's true.
total, like for some reason people FOMO in. Like,
Well, yeah. I mean,
they
if
like
you
to see
hold
big
one
numbers.
of 10,000, it sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
But so talk about the granularity of the flexibility that a developer might have. What if their token inherently, their project requires inflationary aspects? Is that even possible on this particular protocol?
Not at the moment, but what they can do in the future is they could do retro, airdrops to people that were staking, wallets that were staking for them on the protocol. So if they outgrow that OSS token and they say, okay, it's time for our own token, then they could basically airdrop the people who are supporting them.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So they basically build the functionality they need later on after they've successfully launched their project and generating revenue, and then they just build
a community around that too,
build a community around that, and then
Yeah.
once they have that, then they can just customize through other platforms and grow from there. So now that developers are able to tokenize their projects, what sort of flexibility do they have now in terms of funding? So the way that we understand funding is developer gets on dev protocol with their project. They mint 10 million tokens, 5% goes to the dev treasury. And then now the retail investors who like this project and want to support that project can stake their dev tokens into that project, thereby yielding newly minted dev tokens, and 51% goes to the project. So the way that we're sort of understanding this whole ecosystem is the developer now is able to sell those dev tokens to pay for development. Would that be like one of the use cases and benefits of using dev protocol?
Exactly. So if they want to sell the token, then they can do that. But they could also distribute the token as a payment if they chose that method. So we're not deciding, we're letting the creators become creative and do their job. We want to take a step back, kind of like the Ethereum Foundation, because when you give people competition and you let them compete against each other, then you see a burst of creativity. So this is what we want to see inside the dev protocol ecosystem.
Sure.
But the major thing is providing them all the tools to be able to do so. So we like to think that we're building the tool set for creators rather than choosing the future for them.
Okay.
So when it comes to like you were saying, retail investors, there's an interface to all of this as far as like selecting which protocol to kind of like delegate your staking weight to. Well, like I guess how far into this? I don't even know if you consider you guys still in like an experimental phase of this project or not. But like, what metrics have you seen like kind of like dominate as far as me being a retail staker? Like, which project would I gravitate to? Is it purely like a marketing thing? Like, I just would go to a project's like website and just I have a feel for the vision of the concept. Like, that's enough. I should stake.
Right.
Or is there like some actually like GitHub code commit metric that I should be looking out for to kind of like gauge my participation? What do you think that is?
Yeah, I think we're following a pretty standard adoption timeline, similar to other protocols and technologies. So right now you have the early enthusiast. So that's a subset of OSS developers, but it's mostly people inside the crypto space looking at tokens. And the people inside crypto looking for tokens are choosing creators that communicate with them, also like get out of the way and like say, here's what I'm working on. And then for OSS developers currently on our platform, mostly are in crypto, and the ones that are in traditional OSS are staking for their own dependencies. So OSS projects have their own dependencies too, and it's a nice way when you're making money on Dev Protocol to also support your own dependencies that are bringing value to your projects. In the future, we think more companies will join Dev Protocol to stake for their dependencies. 90% of enterprise software is open source software.
Wow.
So if these enterprises have an incentive to make some money for themselves while also helping their OSS dependencies, I think it's a great value add for everyone in the ecosystem. And especially for someone like GitHub. So let's say GitHub has like $100 million marketing budget.
Mm-hmm.
What better marketing can there be than to support the creators on your platform by staking for them and making money
Absolutely.
on that 1 million?
Absolutely.
So we think in the future, we'll see more people staking for their dependencies, and we'll see foundations. So for example, the Chainlink Foundation launching on Dev Protocol and staking for open source building on top of Chainlink, but also open source that they depend on. And we'll see their communities joining in.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Talk about a little bit about how a retail investor takes a look at all these projects on Dev Protocol and makes a determination on. Typically, a retail investor wants to maximize their gains. They may not necessarily want to support a protocol so much so that they get the most gains. So how do they determine which protocol to invest in or stake in so that they yield the most dev tokens?
Yeah, so actually currently the APY is fixed among all projects.
Okay.
That's to make sure that people stake for the project that they love the most, that they want to support. Because if we had an APY that was chosen by the creator, then you could get projects saying, hey, we'll give you 99% APY.
Sure.
But the project that is actually building and innovating and needs that, APY and needs that funding, then they won't receive any. So we're looking at something in the future for creators to choose the stake-in rate and how much they would receive and how much the patron would receive. But right now it's standard amongst all projects.
Okay, let's drill a little bit deeper into this question. So you're saying the APY is static across all projects, which makes sense. So if a project gets 1 million stakers, just for the sake of this example, that means that there's still an equal amount of dead tokens generated, even though that there's 1 million staking into a single project. So that means that there's less tokens distributed to those 1 million stakers. Would that be correct?
Yes. So our APY is dynamic. So it depends on the amount of dev staked on the platform, similar to, any governance, liquidity mining, or ETH 2.0.
Sure.
But where it differs is that the APY also increases based on the amount of OSS projects joined. Right. So if more OSS projects join, then each one produces inflation. Okay. And that inflation rate will be chosen in the future by the DAO.
Okay.
Interesting. It's very similar to like MakerDAO with
DAI stablecoin.
Correct. Like the DAO is kind of responsible for maintaining that stability, right, within the ecosystem. That's awesome.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. No, that's
and I kind of like the idea of like not making it like this cutthroat competitive environment of like, projects are just kind of like out competing one another with APY.
Yeah.
It can get ugly real quick in that kind of ecosystem.
Yeah. And it makes more sense to have stakers support the project that they like.
Yeah, but it's more how would you word that? Like I don't know if holistic's the right word.
No, I think it's just you support the token that you like. I mean, or support the project that you like versus trying to get the best yield.
Because that adds on to already the current like spirit, I guess, of open source development, right? Like that's currently how these developers sustain. They sustain off of contributions from like supporters, right? Like basically donations or stuff like that. So, but this is what Dev Protocol is doing is like adding a potential, like we don't really know what the outcome of these like campaigns are going to be like for the protocols, the projects themselves. Like they could use the tool sets of Dev and like really distribute some serious future value to their early supporters this way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And we think that since the APY is standard, we'll see when the platform becomes more advanced, we'll see OSS projects becoming more creative with
Yeah.
how they deliver value. So whether that's perks or even distributing their own creator token, we think we'll see these use cases soon.
That makes sense.
Okay, so the other question that I had in relation to the 10 million tokens that are generated is how does a developer get liquidity for those 10 million tokens so that there's trading happening on the OSS token?
Yeah, so right now we don't provide any liquidity for OSS tokens, and the purpose of this is because the OSS token is meant to be held by the maintainers, because that OSS token receives the inflationary funding from Dev Protocol.
Okay.
But in the future, we may see that projects choose to trade them on Uniswap or another exchange as a source of funding, a source of valuation. And if they do this, then the DAO can vote to use some of the 5% in our treasury for liquidity. But the OSS projects can always, sell the dev tokens, put it in ETH, and then take some of their OSS tokens in the treasury and start building some liquidity and offer some liquidity mining incentives.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense because, I mean, if a developer just onboards onto Dev Protocol, they mint these 10 million tokens, and they want to generate some hype, as we've seen in Uniswap, right? Then I think that would be their only option, is to sell those dev tokens for ETH and then post up the liquidity.
Yeah. Or I mean, I guess now's a better time than any. I was gonna wait till the very end of this talk to ask you this question. You guys kind of teased on your Twitter about like some incubator platform or a feature, I guess, in the future.
Yeah.
All it said was that incubator, so we kind of had to read.
Read between the lines.
Imagine what that meant. So I kind of thought it would have something to do with this very topic. You know, like incubation and like liquidity generation is like a hot sector these days, especially in DeFi, right? So I was wondering if you guys were gonna step your foot into that arena. You know what I mean?
I'll get into that. So you asked us what phase Dev Protocol is in, and I think we're in the adoption phase. We're gonna release a major growth hack, which is the Dev Protocol Incubator, hopefully on March 1st. And this is really important because right now, if you want to join Dev Protocol, you need to submit an application. Then you need to build a community that starts staking for you.
Yes.
What the incubator will do is it's going to pre-choose projects. So we're going to have 20 major OSS projects that we begin staking for before they join the platform. And these projects can range anywhere from Signal, Wikipedia, Python, or even Web3 OSS projects. And we're going to start staking 10, 20,000 dev for each one. And if they want that funding, then they'll have to join the marketplace and they'll have to authenticate their GitHub repository.
Oh, wow.
And they'll receive the funding. So hopefully soon we have some major OSS projects joining Dev Protocol because it's a more sustainable solution because we provide more incentive for their patrons to support them. Also, we're using our Chaos Oracle to make it required that all OSS projects joining will be required to tweet about us, to share the news, and to grow our awareness across OSS. So it's going to be every quarter, we're going to choose 20 major OSS projects. So hopefully those 20 projects will have hopefully 10 or 15 join. And they'll tweet about us, and hopefully that starts a snowball effect and starts some network effects in the Dev Protocol ecosystem.
Can you talk a little bit about the Chaos Oracle? What's its purpose? Where did it come from? And how is it different than the oracles that we're aware of, like Chainlink?
Yeah, so the Chaos Oracle bridges Web 2, Web 3, and the point of the Chaos Oracle is to basically confirm secret keys and secret tokens from Web 2 and confirm them on the Web 3 blockchain, and to specifically authenticate a token. So we plan on launching more markets. So our major mission is to tokenize all open assets, and all open assets means anything that's free to consume. So YouTube, Spotify, research are major markets. And in order to do this, we'll have to make sure that the person trying to tokenize the project has ownership of that project.
Sure.
So Chaos comes in and it authenticates confidentially the secret keys from those networks. So I'd say it's more similar to like API 3 rather than Chainlink, which is price feeds.
Interesting.
No wonder we're seeing like oracles, all over the place these days.
Spawn,
There's so many different
use cases.
Yeah, so many different sectors to really tap into and bring in all this data.
And just to authenticate a project, I mean, all they need to do is sign with their private keys, right?
Exactly. So all you're doing is submitting a transaction to Ethereum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. What's the feedback that you're getting from developers using Dev Protocol so far?
Yeah. So our initial feedback when we approach developers in the traditional OSS space is that they're still skeptical of crypto because of 2017, which is surprising because,
it's happening
it's kind
all
of the
over
evolution.
again.
Yeah, it's happening all over again.
Yeah.
But when we speak to crypto OSS projects, they're really excited about Dev Protocol. They're really excited that they could focus on development, because when you speak to the best developers in the space, they just want to develop. They don't care about the UI, UX. They don't care about marketing or communications. They just want to build, and get it out there as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So they're really happy that they could basically bootstrap their project without having to worry about lawyers, having to worry about VCs, having to worry about building communities, because most of that happens organically with Dev Protocol. And you could start putting that money in your war chest. And then when you're ready for that, then you could start focusing on kind of those time-consuming tasks.
That brings up a good question. Is there any curation on Dev Protocol's part on what projects can be onboarded onto this?
Yeah, so we just have some basic requirements. So we want to make sure your project has an open source license, of course. We want to make sure that there's sufficient development going on. And we want to make sure that it's on a fork that has no value added to it. But it's not too strict. We want to make sure that we're not, becoming a gatekeeper. And in the future, we hope to pass on the gatekeeping to the community or to a decentralized curation tool, maybe like Claros.
Yeah, I just wonder if there was ever, I don't know if there could ever be a malicious type project on Dev Protocol. Just its nature is to do some, like a virus, like an open source virus. Like would that ever be considered as something that wouldn't be supported by Dev Protocol?
An open source virus. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's I guess we get into the gray area or something like that. But that would be interesting that people would support like a virus,
I mean, there's dark sides to every sword.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's always that possibility.
The good thing about Dev Protocol is that patrons can unstake whenever they want. So I'm actually seeing a lot from the community when a creator doesn't talk to the community, or they're not developing enough, or they don't engage enough. Then they start creating unions of patrons that say, okay, let's unstake for these guys right away. Yeah. So I think it's really cool that we're seeing this happen. But I think that's a more healthy way of funding early projects when you don't know the intentions of the creators, where you could just unstake at any time you're unpleased.
Yeah. Yeah, man, we talk about this all the time. If governments ever get onboarded to cryptocurrencies, we hope that they provide some ability for their citizens to stake and unstake when we're unhappy with their government. If we're unhappy, we just unstake and their valuation of their coin goes down.
Yeah.
And it forces them as participants to be better.
Yeah.
Versus, you have riots and, nothing happens with these riots.
Hence my belief, like government isn't going to participate like so nicely and gently the way you just described it.
Yeah.
I don't think government likes to put themselves in
Yeah.
that kind of position.
To get off topic a bit, I think we're seeing it happen already where you have remote work. So, anyone can move to any city or any town they want to, and they're not stuck. So if you're unhappy with the current regulation or government or politics or whatever, you can easily move, anytime you want. So I think that will keep politics and politicians more close to the ground.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're starting to see sort of a migration from California to Texas.
Definitely.
And, I mean, it's perfect. Bad timing, with this ice storm. But
yeah, they're all going back now.
Yeah, they're
like bad idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you're voting with your own physical self in a way, like whether or not. I mean, your own existence is like your stake within the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean. Dude, I mean, this whole staking concept, I mean, it's happening. I mean, Bitcoin just crossed $1 trillion today.
Yeah.
And, I mean, putting your money into Bitcoin is sort of like choosing, you're voting against the U.S. dollar or whatever fiat currency that's out there.
Yeah.
And I think, like to your point, I think governments are going to start trying to figure out ways to crack down. Like in India, they're starting to crack down on cryptocurrencies, and they're banning it. So
I think it's just because out of like pure
unknown,
they just don't. This space is so wild and it advances so quickly. Every day something's changing about it. How do you regulate something like that? And especially when when we're like really enhancing these decentralized ecosystems, and now we're building like really cool tools for them to self-sustain and to like flourish into the future.
Yeah.
How the fuck do you, how do you get a grip on that?
It's like a virus, it's constantly changing. So how do you stay in front of that? Except this virus has millions of participants around millions of, countries, built in 24/7. So it's one of the hardest viruses for governments to fight. Yeah.
There's no quarantine for this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's amazing.
Yeah.
Think about it.
And especially when there's a virus that, has economic but also philosophical incentives for the adopters. So it's kind of the same thing with Dev Protocol. So before open source before Dev Protocol, people gathered around a mission, but there wasn't any economic incentives. But now with the creator tokens, you can easily apply economic incentives with, $200 in gas to any open source project. So if people want to quit their job or work part-time, it's a lot easier now because now they have OSS tokens that give them the right for that funding. And if those tokens are ever traded on an exchange, then, some of these founders can be set for life because, what would Linux be worth if they had a token?
Dude, I mean, Linux, almost all these $1 trillion companies were built on Linux. I mean, imagine if,
they were like incubated by dev, and like what that means if you're one of those early dev supporters, like damn dude, you'd be chilling. You'd be chilling pretty hard right now.
They can still bootstrap on dev, and then once they grow past that, then they could cut off the faucet like I said before, and they could say, okay, now if you want support on this or that, you have to hold X amount of Linux tokens. So that would be a great way to grow their microeconomy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the use cases that are underutilized. I've seen some tokens that grant you access to an application, and don't really require you to spend any money to use that application. You just have it in your wallet, and then you have access to it. And I think in a lot of cases that makes the most sense for Web3 to execute how they generate revenue. Because at that point, if people are holding onto the token, well, the valuation of the token is going up. And that's probably the more efficient way than just charging people for access.
Yeah.
So I think we might start seeing that a little bit more often with a bunch of these tokens.
I would say that's a social token sector.
Oh, yeah.
So one example of that is like, for example, Julian Hootaloop. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. From Rex, but also from StakeDAO. So he has a personal token, and that gives you some benefits for holding it.
Okay.
And another example of that is APY Vision, which allows you to see all your liquidity providing positions, and you get premium features for holding that token. So I think this is definitely an underrated space, and I think it's probably going to blow up late 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could hold like Kanye West token and receive exclusive content.
Yeah. Dude,
absolutely.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been fiddling and dabbling with the idea of like, how do we spin up like a social token for content creators on YouTube now that we're like deep in the YouTube game.
Yeah.
And we're in the crypto space. Like, why go through the traditional route of like open up a Patreon?
Yeah, I agree.
Like, why not utilize NFTs and like, ERCs in creative new ways to kind of like, like maybe like kickstart like 1,000 limited edition NFTs to your community. They can kind of bid on them, and then you get VIP access to whatever it is down the road. Imagine if somebody like PewDiePie had 1,000 of those NFTs to his community. How much would those be worth?
Yeah,
like somebody with millions of subscribers. Like, we're already seeing CryptoPunks sell for the millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much are PewDiePie punks gonna go for? You know what I mean?
That's so true.
So yeah, you're right. Like there's so many new sectors like emerging, and they're so undervalued and so underhyped, I guess, and people are just now starting to knock at those.
There's a couple of interesting things that I notice in these conversations, Scott, is that we seem to speak in the context of Ethereum, and just today, Binance is number 3. Binance Smart Chain, well, Binance BNB. Is number 3, and it's right there, basically competing with Ethereum.
Yeah, it's like nudging it a little bit.
Yeah, it's very close. Yeah. And so my question to you is, like, from building this protocol, is there any consideration with deciding to go with Ethereum versus any other blockchain platform?
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at protocols, we're not looking at the price of the protocol. We're looking at the developer ecosystem, and Ethereum is just, it's night and day. It's the Ethereum developer ecosystem is so far ahead of any other layer 1 blockchain.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's why we're here. And also, if you want to build Legos, and Dead Protocol is definitely a Lego. We can talk about how we see Dead Protocol in the future interacting with other projects. But if you want to have that composability, then you definitely need to be on Ethereum.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of projects are still hesitant to go to layer 2 on Ethereum, because you lose some of that. So that's why we're on Ethereum right now.
Yeah, the community. Yeah, because I mean, we have this debate internally for our own project is, when do we start moving to a side chain so that we're not hit with, $100 transactions just to move, an NFT that's like $20, but you're right. If we move to a side chain, you're essentially you're forcing your community to move into a sector that doesn't have NFTs and ERC20s of the standard that they're used to with Uniswap. So this is a big issue. So I guess from your perspective, you guys are waiting for ETH 2.0 to calm the fees, right?
We're also looking at layer 2 right now. We're just in the middle of some big developments with the incubator, but also with a special airdrop that we're working on.
Oh,
I can talk about that later too.
Dude, Block Runner, jeez, subscribe now.
I'm giving some alpha leaks here.
That's what's up.
Oh, that's awesome. I guess, I mean, so many projects are working on airdrops just because it brings in the community, and there's this huge marketing standpoint, and it's just a way to bring attention to your token.
And like boost satisfaction at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
I mean, if it's all about ecosystem and community building, I mean, you got to keep your community, satisfied and happy one way or another, right? I mean, it's not, and it sets like a good precedent, I guess, for like if Dev is launching like an incubator ecosystem, like all these protocols, they might not necessarily know how to build communities, right? So like they're going to need models to kind of like work off of in the future. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And the great thing about airdrops is that it's the most efficient marketing. So if you could really target down who your users are, and you can airdrop them money, there's no better marketing. Why would I go spend, $30,000 on a YouTube interview? Not you guys, but maybe you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And, hope that I get supporters rather than just going to my supporters, putting money in their hand and saying, hey, look at my protocol and how we can help you.
Yeah.
So the upcoming airdrop that we're going to have is going to drop some dev tokens to the top contributors on GitHub, specifically GitHub contributors for OSS projects.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Damn, yeah.
Dude, that's one hell of a, like, hey, like we're here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hell yeah.
Like 1inch just did something like that, like last week, I think. It's a competitor to Uniswap, and I think they chose like the top Uniswap traders, like the most active, decentralized exchange users, and they just airdropped all of us some 1inch. You're like, whoa, hold on, what's 1inch now?
Yeah.
So now you're kind of like forced to investigate a little bit. Then you kind of figure out like this is a good user interface. This is a good experience. Like maybe I should be using 1inch instead of Uniswap.
Yeah. Imagine how companies like can use that too. Like for example, Uber and Lyft, if they had their own governance tokens and they had on-chain transactions of Lyft users, and they could just airdrop, Uber tokens to Lyft users. That would be one hell of a competition.
Yeah, it's just like free rides.
Free rides, yeah. Free rides.
Oh yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, so I guess you're thinking about all these like layer one solutions and Dev Protocol being on Ethereum. Is Dev Protocol also considering using one of these Internet of Blockchain solutions to potentially make it easier for anyone on these siloed blockchains to eventually get onto Dev Protocol?
Yeah, definitely. So our current roadmap is basically building out the protocol and building out the interfaces and the growth paths. And then once that's complete, then we could definitely start looking at how to plug it into every blockchain if we wanted to.
Sure.
But right now we don't think that's a priority, just because
it's still so early anyway.
Yeah, it's so early, and it's really hard to choose a winner. And if we're spending crucial time on trying to choose the right horse, we're going to lose out on like building our own products. And we definitely need to find product market fit like every other crypto project.
Absolutely.
To become successful in the long run.
So what's the best way, if you're not a developer, to kind of like get involved in the construction of this whole ecosystem and like, support?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in the future, we're going to see like philanthropists on Dev Protocol. So we're going to have Dev Protocol philanthropists funding open source projects and making money. You could basically start your own VC firm if you wanted to, based on Dev Protocol's ecosystem, funding the right open source projects.
That sounds like a hint.
Have a future.
I think we got breaking news here.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's good to kind of like.
It's a good use case.
It is good to kind of breach, like open the doors even more to kind of like start to think, or imagine like how far can this go, and like potentially.
And teams themselves can become philanthropists. So like I said before, if you have the Chainlink Foundation funding their dependencies and they're taking part of that creator token, and they're helping that team become successful, and vice versa. There's definitely like a huge sustainability in this ecosystem.
Oh, so that means Bill Gates confirmed, right?
Bill Gates dropped. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I guess the next question have to be is, what's like the biggest priority for Dev Protocol right now in terms of like the roadmap? What's like the driving focus for the development team right now?
Yeah, so right now we're working on the incubator, and then we're working on the UI UX of the current stake social DApp. After that, we're going to have the airdrop, and then we're going to be working relentlessly on delivering a DAO for the community. Hopefully that will happen in Q4 2021, if not Q1 2022.
Okay.
And also growing the team. So we're going to have some new team members joining us soon.
Oh, nice.
And we're excited about, getting the pedal to the metal, because it's been 2 years of development and now it's time for adoption. And we also may have some more integrations into new markets and into new sectors. And possibly, we could splinter the incubator into multiple niches. So right now it's just for projects chosen, but we could have the incubator and we could split it up into 20 different ways. So we could have an incubator for space. We could have an incubator for biomedicine.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And we actually spoke to a researcher at Harvard who's working on space tech. And he said that the space industry is a huge open source market, and they definitely need funding because everything related to space is, really expensive, and you're hiring the top minds in the world essentially. So they are on GitLab, and we may integrate soon with GitLab to make sure that we go to space.
To the moon. Had to do that.
What's the percentage split of projects on Dev Protocol that are crypto focused versus not crypto focused?
Yeah, so right now I would say it's 90% traditional and 10% crypto focused, just because I think a lot of projects launch their launch governance tokens really fast in the open source space. And
so that means you're doing a lot of educating to a certain extent as to, well, here's a cryptocurrency and blockchain and governance, and so there's a lot of educating on these developers, right?
Yeah, definitely, because for a lot of them, this is the first time that they're interacting with MetaMask, with Uniswap. So the new UI UX that's coming out next month is going to have a lot of education. We're taking all the traditional open source developers to class with this upgrade. So we're going to have onboarding animations. We're going to have hints and tips and post onboarding steps of how to grow their community and their patrons. So yeah, we're really excited for that one because it's definitely going to add a lot of value to the ecosystem for creators.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, it sounds like Dev is excellent, like for a new protocol or project in the incubation stage, like in the phase 1, I guess, tier of a life cycle of a project. And I think like the whole space is kind of in that realm, like at least the decentralized space, and kind of haven't really figured out what happens beyond that point. Like once these like initial developers kind of like, get things started, and now you kind of pass the keys off to the DAO in the community. Like how do you self-govern at that point and like, distribute responsibility within the ecosystem? Like is Dev potentially going to like offer even more solutions and tools, in this realm in the future, do you think?
So are you talking about creator projects or Dev Protocol itself?
I think ultimately the governance of Dev Protocol. So for example, are you, so part of the UI update that you're talking about is so that not only can Dev govern itself, but also govern the other projects that are on Dev Protocol, right?
No, so the DAO will be launched in a Q4 2021 that will create a community treasury and also decentralize a lot of the parameters so that our stakers are able to vote. But we won't be governing the creator tokens for open source projects.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I don't mean like governing the. So for example, if a project 500,000 tokens go to the treasury, so now Dev token owners can now vote with the weight of 500,000 tokens for that protocol. So is there going to be a UI on the website on Dev Protocol to vote for, one thing or another to that granular project level?
Yeah, exactly. So you're speaking about meta governance.
Yeah.
And we expect a lot of OSS projects in the future to bring governance on chain. And these OSS tokens can be the source of that. So you'll use the OSS token to vote on leadership. You can even use the OSS token to vote on if commit is merged, for
Sure.
example. So becomes a governance token essentially.
Interesting.
And since we take a 5% fee, our community can vote on all of those. So we'll capture a pretty sizable amount of voting power. So we essentially become an OSS like ETF, right?
Yeah.
And we're passing these voting rights to our users. And if the users, whatever the majority vote is, then we push that to the OSS project.
Wow.
Meta governance. Yeah, that's going to be huge just because, I mean, for every project that's spun up on using Dev Protocol, I mean, 5% goes to the treasury, and that 5% is huge in terms of like how much weight a particular decision needs to be made per project. I wonder how many of these projects, like specifically the 90%, are. I mean, that's like a huge educational process to say, hey, now your users can vote on, what direction you take your project. I'm sure that's not an easy thing to like comprehend for people that aren't part of the crypto sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think that's 2 to 3 years away. And hopefully, the speed of the space, 2 to 3 years is probably like 10, 20 years. So
Yeah.
by the time that comes around, we think a lot of improvements will be there, and crypto will be a lot more mainstream and easy to explain. But at the same time, I think people in blockchain shouldn't, stress themselves over how hard it is to explain crypto and blockchain to Web2 users, just because Web3 offers so many more advantages. It's just natural that it's harder to explain, and you could capture so much of your own value. And when you become a creator and an owner of the value that you provide, you need to spend a little more time learning this. So it's not as easy as ordering an Uber, for example, but you're capturing a lot more value using these services. So it's best for you to spend, an hour more learning what it is and how to do it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like if you're comparing Web 2 to Web 3, Web 3 gives you the flexibility to capture more of that value and interaction than just ordering an Uber ride. What if ordering an Uber ride allows you to get more airdrops from Uber, right? I mean, that's a really interesting way to put it, and I haven't really thought about it in that angle.
Yeah, when you use Web3, you become your own boss essentially. So the difference between an employee and a boss is, a completely different knowledge and skill set.
Yeah.
So if you're going to become your own boss, then you need to do a little more work.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess one of the last questions is going back to Bitcoin. Where do you see Bitcoin becomes like sort of the signal for the entire space? Where do you see the ultimate valuation of Bitcoin going? Do you think it's going to approach and go beyond gold, or is it just one of those tokens that eventually get phased out? I mean, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I'm an economist by heart, and I think when you study the history of money, all money is basically a narrative that's adopted by the people in control. And right now, crypto is built in the future. And I think the people who are coming into power in the next 20 years will be holding crypto. I think kids are so attached to their iPhones and to all this technology. It's constantly surrounding us. It's becoming a part of us. Even Elon Musk is implanting it inside our brains. So I don't think the younger generation wants to have paper or wants to have gold. Everything will be digital essentially. So I think Bitcoin is going to become more of a store of value, like gold is. And I think Ethereum is definitely on its way to become like a digital oil for the new economy.
Damn. I mean, we feel exactly the same way. I think Bitcoin is going to start becoming more or less volatile and eventually become a store of value. but in the sense, a store of value that goes beyond gold, eventually.
Yeah, probably mostly due to like the technology at all of our disposal. It's a lot more difficult, I guess, of a proposition to acquire like physical gold than it is to acquire a Bitcoin. You know, especially because we're all, like you're saying, connected to this technology every single minute of our lives.
Yeah.
You know, like the interface of Bitcoin is pretty much what we're used to.
So I think in this cycle we're in the phase where companies start adopting Bitcoin, just like Tesla and Elon have, and then potentially in the next cycle we're going to start seeing countries start adopting it, because if they don't, they're going to get left behind, and there's really no way to recover once these huge institutions are buying and holding.
Yeah. Hopefully we get. Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, hopefully we get past this sentiment we have, like next cycle. Hopefully, like, we just stop that and we just like a constant up trajectory. You know, no more downs, dude.
Yeah,
I don't want to go through that again. You know,
it's a lot easier to build when there's downs, though.
It is. Great point.
It is.
Great point.
But yeah, if you look at Bitcoin, it's following the adoption like roadmap perfectly. So first it's early enthusiasts, then it's investors, and then it's companies. So of course it's going to be tech companies, right?
Yeah.
And then next is larger enterprises, and then it's going to be small countries, and then big countries, and then it's going to become a global currency.
Man, that's all you need to say. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that the implication of that is just like hard to comprehend, just because as it's happening, it's hard to even believe like something like this is happening while we're able to take advantage of it. And I'm sure looking back, when kids born today, they look back and they see a 100 trillion valuation of Bitcoin, like it was obvious, right? It should have been obvious today that it's probably going to get to $100 trillion at some point.
Yeah,
but it's just crazy to believe that we're able to participate into something like this.
In order for it to be obvious, though, today you have to understand the flaws of the current system. So a lot of people just aren't aware.
That's true.
Now, it's gonna take like these flaws to become more like exposed and evident.
Yeah.
So for that switch to flip in, like the majority's head.
Basically, $100 for milk. Like, there's something wrong here.
Yeah, like how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. So markets reward early participants for doing the research and fixing the flaws. So
exactly.
I had a friend that was creating a hedge fund for crypto in 2017, and he had to figure out so much stuff with his lawyer, like regulation that wasn't ever discussed by the SEC. And the market eventually rewarded him for figuring out all those issues, because when big investors came to the crypto hedge fund space and they wanted to buy out smaller hedge funds, he was one of the only people to figure out all that regulation and go through all those tasks that are really easy today, because now lawyers have so much experience with crypto.
Sure.
So you got paid handsomely for that. And it's the same thing with crypto founders today and crypto investors. The market is rewarding you for being early, for figuring out those challenges that every user faces.
That reminds me of the last question for today, and thank you for being on, Scott, is how much of decision making goes into, like, from the team's perspective, into like legal implications of what you guys are doing? Do you guys make that into like a huge like discussion point in deciding on what path to take for Dev Protocol?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's two types of projects right now in crypto. One project is, anonymous hackers launching stuff on the whim. Yep. And then another is like more calculated projects that follow like an enterprise approach. So Uniswap is a good one. Chainlink is a good one. And we're definitely following that approach. So we're working with a Swiss lawyer right now, moving our corporation to Switzerland.
Interesting.
And we're also in talks with a U.S. attorney, just because the U.S. is the toughest regulators in the world. Yeah. And you want to make sure that everything is sound in America. And if everything is sound in America, you probably won't have a problem abroad. So everything we do is double checked, and we definitely don't, launch anything without that.
Do you recommend any projects, or do you recommend in general for projects to follow that sound? If they're trying to be, not anonymous and not do a rug pull, do you recommend projects to follow like legal, like structure, like what Dev Protocol is doing?
Um, I would say that a lot of projects that we see in like especially DeFi are experiments. So I understand why they don't want to spend $200,000 on legal fees just to launch an experiment that
Sure.
might get hacked an hour later.
Yeah.
But if you want to build a long-term project and you want to do it right and you don't want to put anyone in jeopardy, it's definitely a positive thing to work side by side with regulators and with lawyers to make sure you're building a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, and ultimately, if more projects don't align with that methodology, I guess, like I don't think we'll ever see this mainstream adoption that we're all hoping for. We'll just remain this like renegade niche of like just hackers and degens and stuff like that. I mean, there's a space for that for sure. I mean, it's fun, but at the end of the day, especially with you guys, because 90% of your users are not that.
Not crypto, yeah.
So yeah, you gotta cater for sure. But hopefully we can convert them all to degens at the end of the day.
Okay, so
sorry. I just wanted to say the last thing I wanted to discuss is how Dev Protocol fits into the DeFi space and how we aim to be composable and become a Lego in ourselves. So I think in the next few years we're going to see GitHub competitors. So I'm not sure if you heard of Radical. Radical is like a peer-to-peer GitHub. They're launching their governance token on the 23rd of February. So I think in the future, we're going to see an integration with Dev Protocol and with Radical, where any developer using Radical can launch a token for their OSS project. And then in another integration with SourceGrid allows you to distribute tokens based on contributions of users. So this composability is, you can't find it on Binance Chain or Tron or Polkadot. So you launch your token on Radical through developing it with Dev Protocol, and then SourceGrid distributes it to your main country, maintainers of that project. And then you have yield aggregators like Yearn Finance or StakeDAO that then offer yield to all the degens out there in DeFi. And then we'll have corporations, piling in to support their OSS dependencies.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, the DeFi is one of the huge tools right now in the crypto space, and just integrating into a project I'm sure is going to yield like 100-fold in terms of like value. So that's really smart. Last final question for sure is, do you believe that in the cryptocurrency space that we can actually have anonymous projects become like a huge staple into the space?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm actually really fascinated by this topic. So I think the future is definitely like anonymous personalities built in. So now, since everyone's working remotely and crypto allows you to become anonymous if you have proper OPSEC, then you could have these anonymous identities that can launch projects without any conflicts. And because a lot of people are scared to put their name out there, especially when you're innovating, like when you're on the borderline and you're innovating something that might fail, then you definitely don't want to put your real name out there. So I think we're going to be able to like burn and mint anonymous identities really easily in the future.
Interesting.
And even potentially sell them,
Yeah, and potentially sell them with an NFT. Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know. Like if it is I'm Satoshi, but I'm really not.
Yeah.
But I built this protocol, but I bought his NFT, off of the OpenSea.
I think everyone should invest in, an anonymous identity. It's definitely great to have.
And I think, I think for sure you should start whatever protocols are working to kind of like build the infrastructure that you should participate them in, like building that on-chain identity, whatever that means. I think they all have different like requirements to do that. Maybe some are like more social.
Yeah.
Others are more like, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
There's just, it's interesting, but yeah, definitely now's the time to be building that online, on-chain reputation.
And we already build anonymous reputations on Web2. Instagram, Twitter.
True.
Those are not our true selves, right? They're very fabricated and they're very idealized versions of ourselves and how we want to portray ourselves.
Yeah.
So bringing it to Web3 is not that different.
So just to clarify, because this is an interesting answer, I didn't anticipate this, but you mean anonymous identities, but with reputation. Like, for example, if Andre Cronje is making like these huge DeFi protocols, but we didn't know that it was Andre, it was just some anonymous person, but he has this history of building like these banger DeFi protocols. That's what you mean by anonymous, because to me, I wouldn't like an anonymous project because they could rug pull, right? They could. And so that's like one of the red flags to me in a project. So to remove that red flag would just be reputation. Is that sort of like the implication that you're saying with anonymous identities?
Yeah, exactly. And if it's your first project as an anonymous person and you don't have a reputation, then it's just a bigger reward for your early, backers.
Right.
So,
Dang.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see social tokens of anonymous people, projects by anonymous people, more so in the future. I think it's definitely the future.
Awesome.
And if your project fails, you just burn your identity and you create a new one.
Yeah.
Dude, I just can't wait till the government like hears about all this. Like, they're gonna be pulling their heads out. Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? It's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, Scott. Let's call it here. I appreciate you coming on. This is like one of the most fascinating projects that we've seen so far, and we really like what you guys are building. And hopefully, it grows into this what we're thinking a multi-billion-dollar project.
Yeah, juggernaut, dude.
We're betting on it at least.
Not financial advice.
Not financial advice, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I hope to come on soon, whether it's for Debt Protocol or just to chat with you guys in general about the market.
Oh, hell yeah. Thanks, man.
We're always down, man, for sure.
Thanks.
And stay safe out there in Texas.
All right,
bro. Take care, you too.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, so that was a good conversation. Scott Gray.
Dude, this space has too many like geniuses, dude.
Dude, they do, man. And dude, the whole anonymous like answer that took me by surprise.
Dude, haven't I been saying this?
You've been saying it, but there's
thing.
like a very specific thing, reputation. I mean, you've mentioned that. You've mentioned that before.
That's why I'm saying we have to investigate like these identity protocols, like Kilt and Litten Tree, whatever. So they're being built,
Yeah.
And Bright ID, we already saw one, dude. We're like, dude, this is fucking weird and fringe, but it's weird and fringe for a reason.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, we need to start participating in these, dude, because that's the future. Our on-chain identity. That means at some point, like, we could build an on-chain identity, and we could just spin up like a bullshit project using that identity, and nobody knows it's us.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
How do you imagine that? Like,
and then if it like takes off, then that identity has value.
It's got value. Then we could just keep building more bullshit projects.
Yeah.
And like people will like just throw money at it. And they won't even know it's us, dude. Like that's what's so crazy.
I mean, the implications of that is huge. And you brought like probably the biggest point, along this topic of conversation is, what is the government? What could they do?
Exactly. They can't do
anything.
Do a goddamn thing, dude. That's why you pull the plug on this. If I was the government, I'm like, dude, like, how do we stop? You can't stop it. You can barely understand it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's accelerating too quickly beyond to the point where you could like, take some time to investigate and then come out with. That's why it's like, dude, you just.
I mean, the probability of a plug,
especially
is getting higher.
Yeah, and then add on top of that, like none of the previous like indicators of like market top work anymore. So there's like not many scenarios anymore that can cause a correction.
Yeah,
like that has to be it.
Yeah,
like that has to be the point where like this whole thing comes crashing down again because like there's just too much bull. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Too much purchasing power.
Man, I mean, we brought up a bunch of good points here, especially behind Bitcoin and the whole Binance chain aspect, where the developers are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty clear. Developers are going to pick Ethereum all day.
Yeah.
Even they'll deal with the gas fee. I mean, Vitalik's working on a solution to that.
Mm-hmm.
We can't deny. We can't think that
Ethereum
is going to fail
No.
just because of gas fees.
He gave the same answer like Andre would give or something maybe there's a little bit of biases there because they're, active participants in the Ethereum ecosystem. So they're more like
yeah, we're already on it. So we're going to bet on that.
But he's not wrong. Like from an objective standpoint, yeah, the developers are on Ethereum. And like I say, liquidity is also there, but we're just now starting to witness a little bit of migration happening.
Yeah.
At least for the liquidity perspective. Like now, if this trend continues and liquidity starts to disseminate into other chains, maybe developers will follow.
Yeah.
Because we know developers, they build where the money's at because that's what supports the protocols they built in the first place. They need that liquidity.
Yeah.
So it's a simple formula, dude. And yeah, Ethereum has relished and enjoyed the opportunity of being the only show in town for years now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know. Fortunately, unfortunately, whatever. Regardless of your stance on this topic, it's happening.
Yeah.
There's some alternatives out there, and we'll see what that means.
Man, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the government trying to listen to these conversations.
Yes, yeah.
Because first they need to bring in experts.
Yeah, big oof.
And then those experts need to be able to explain this is not a threat, but it is a threat.
Yeah, it is. It is. Especially with these the Anon shit takes it to a whole nother level because you want to dismiss it, be because a lot of them do rug, but some of them could become
the next Satoshi.
They're bigger. They form actual societies, digital societies.
Yeah.
With legitimate liquidity power. They might have more TVL locked in an entire nation's GDP. That could be a future scenario. So how do they leverage that power?
Yeah, and I don't want to discount Anonymous completely because if we were able to understand code enough to understand that they've locked their team funds for 3 years, it wouldn't matter that they're anonymous because they can't rug pull.
Yeah.
Right? And to be able to confirm that is extremely powerful.
Yeah, man.
So anonymous projects aren't the red flag that they used to be, but you got to do a ton more research.
You really do. And you have to be actively engaged in that community as well, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's a day-to-day thing. When you're involved in one of these decentralized organizations, it's you have a job. That's the point.
Yeah.
You gotta work at the company to understand its flaws and its
That's
perks.
true.
You have to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, well, at least to get the best grasp of it. Yeah, you could be an outsider, speculator, and just digest the surface level details. But if you're an insider, you know everything.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? So, and that's the exact same thing that's happening. It's just a distributed network of that same.
Yeah, no, it's just a lot to think about in this podcast. That's why we like doing the interviews, man. There's so much to learn and comprehend from
Are we still on the record, by the way?
Yeah, we're on the record.
Oh, okay. All right. Hopefully, I didn't say anything.
No,
anything.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, man. We should get more interviews. I guess for y'all watching, let us know if you want more of that. You know, there's some more projects that obviously, there's tons of projects that I want to know more about.
Yeah,
this is just the first one. I want to know more about Barnbridge. I want to know more about
Aave.
Yeah, Aave, Polkadot. Everything being built on Polkadot. I just want to know more about that. See what their answer is. Oh, why aren't you building on Ethereum?
Yeah.
They'd be nah, fuck that, bro. Ethereum's dead.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they wouldn't say that because that's not true.
That's the opposite.
Yeah, they're Ethereum's great, but this is how we're gonna make it better. That's I think what their answer would be.
Response, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this podcast and let us know what you think about Dev Protocol. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at The Blockrunner and also at MetaZone.io. All the links to in the description, and make sure you follow Dev Protocol as well. Let us know what you think, and we will see you in the next podcast.
Peace.